You're listening to the Around the Lens podcast, the home of high-quality, roundtable, visual journalism discussion about the news, topics, and gear related to our career field. Now, here's the host of our show, David J. Murphy.
Hello and welcome to episode 209 of Around the Lens. I'm your host, David J. Murphy. Joining me this week is my special guest, Mary Schroeder. Hello, Mary. How are you doing today?
Very well. It's a good day.
Indeed it is. You're joining us all the way from Chicago, right? Beautiful weather, beautiful warm Chicago.
No, I'm from Detroit.
Detroit. Oh, I'm so sorry to insult you like that. How's everything going in Detroit?
It's beautiful here. The weather is warm. I mean, for winter, it's been outstanding. It's almost 40 degrees.
Yeah, that's great. Or maybe, is it great, or should we be worried? Should it be 40 degrees in January?
Oh, it shouldn't be, but it sure is nice to go out there and not shovel.
Indeed. So, Mary, tell the audience a little about yourself. Give them a little bit about your background, who you are, and what you've done. Obviously, you've had a long 40-year career, but I'll let you kind of tell the audience about yourself.
My first camera that I bought with babysitting money was a Kodak X15, and I was 9 years old. And from there, I knew I wanted to be a photographer. I grew up in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and I went to school at Ohio University for photography. And then I got an internship at the Detroit Free Press when I was 21 years old and never left. That was in 1979. And I retired from the paper January 2019.
Wow.
After 40 years.
Amazing. Yeah, I don't know many people who do 40 years in a career nowadays, and especially today's. That's awesome that you were able to maintain that job with them for the entire time, and that's a great legacy and a great career. How was the retirement celebration? They probably had a pretty good retirement celebration for you, right?
It was very nice. It was at the paper. When people leave or retire, half the people stay at their desks,
right? Mm-hmm.
But not for mine. Everybody came.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then we had a nice party at the Detroit Yacht Club afterwards.
Oh, great! Did they have like a slideshow of your work or of you from the paper?
No. It was all online.
Okay.
Then I created the gallery.
Oh, nice. Well, great. Well, we're glad to have you here, and hopefully you can impart some of that 40 years of experience on some of the topics we're going to be talking about today. And so we got a great show and a lot of different things to talk about. So let's just get right into it. So our first topic we're talking about tonight is the story I saw on Petapixel about a woman who lives in her van, who goes around and does her photography and does everything out of her van. And this struck me as something that I thought was interesting because back when I was a kid or an adult growing up, I thought, as a single man back in the day, I thought this would be a great sort of thing to do, and this would have been how I would have wanted to sort of live and do my work. Kind of just living in a van and going around the world, traveling and seeing the sights, and just not being tied down to anything, any sort of apartment or any sort of house or whatnot. Just be able to go to some new town, new city, open up my doors, grab my camera, and start going out there and taking some pictures and whatnot. And obviously, I know you stayed in Detroit for the majority of your career, right? Working for the newspaper.
Yeah.
But I mean, you've obviously traveled and done travel with the camera, right? So I'm sure that right. Would this sort of like living in a van type thing, would this be ever something that would appeal to you, or something if you were in your younger days?
Well, I had a boat, a 32-foot sailboat, and then a 30-foot power boat. And on both of those, I always took my camera, and I would be gone for a month at a time.
Okay, there you go.
And shoot pictures. I mean, whatever you make, whatever you're going to do, you just make it work.
Right.
And so when I was in my boat, I've taken beautiful pictures.
Yeah.
It's just another form. I personally like staying in one place in Detroit because I form bonds that
Sure.
way. Living in a van, that's the only thing is you you're you don't form bonds with people.
No, absolutely. I mean, if you're
That's that's the only downside.
yeah, no, if you're traveling all over the United States or all over wherever you can drive in a van, yeah, you're moving from place to place, fly by night. It looks like in this for her, she stays mostly on the West Coast. So depending on how much of a region you're covering, you could potentially cover some decent ground, or develop some relationships in the general area that you're going back and forth
Yeah,
on. But you have to imagine, if people don't see you but once a few months or something like that, they're not going to develop those kind of bonds as obviously being seeing you day in and day out. Uh, you know,
yeah.
Developing bonds is really important. How'd you go about, when you started, and how'd you go about developing and sort of growing those bonds that you were so necessary, obviously, when you want to get, people to trust you and, let them into your lives, and, take photos and whatnot. How do you develop bonds with folks? Or did you in
To,
Detroit?
oh, yeah. So by all means, just being natural and also working for the Detroit Free Press. We're the big dog on
Mm-hmm.
campus. And as soon as you say that, it was like, okay, that in itself. And then people would notice you. I covered sports in the 80s and early 90s, and the guys would see the pictures. And then when I say I want to do something, they would always say, yes, Mary, okay. And then I would always give them a print. But by just being in the community and stating exactly what you want done and how it's going to be played, usually people were amenable to
Mm-hmm.
it. But it's the connection with people
I think,
that's so important.
I think that's interesting. You mentioned giving people a print. That's, I think, extremely important. I've heard other photographers do the same thing, which I think is pretty valuable nowadays with everything being digital. Most times it's like, oh, I'll send you it via email, or maybe I'll tweet about, the photograph so you can see it there. But I think actually going and making a physical print and then bringing that or delivering it to the person says so much more about the importance that they had in your life in that short amount of time that maybe you worked with them and took their photo. So that's a probably an important principle. I think most photographers, photojournalists should still emphasize today, right? Getting actual, creating a print of
Oh,
their work subject.
right. Because if you just send it an email, they're not going to print it out. But by you physically taking it to them and saying, here's a print, them opening it up and putting it on the wall.
Hmm.
I still give prints to my friends who do something important and they totally appreciate it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've got actually a Canon Pro 100 printer here in my house that I use for printing out photos. So it is nice to have
Yeah.
that capability, and especially with like the family shots and stuff like that. That's one thing I noticed in my home, because I most of my stuff is of my family nowadays. But in my home, anyways, I don't have photographs of the kids anywhere or the family. And then we were like, we need photos, and so I got the printer and I've been using that ever since. And I got it actually on a Black Friday deal for like $60, which is a great deal for this printer because it's such a nice high level professional printer that normally costs like $300. And so be on the lookout for that. By the way, if you're ever looking for a good high quality photo printer, the Canon Pro 100 usually goes on sale for not much. But I think what's interesting about traveling, and you can tell me this. When you were on the boat, did you kind of were you always at sea, or did you hit docks and hit land and hit new places?
This is the Great Lakes.
Okay,
So
great, yeah.
what uh, so in Lake Huron, we have Port Huron to Mackinac race, which is 250 miles, and you don't put into port at all, you just race. And so I would transmit via satellite
Oh my
phone.
goodness.
But then I would take my own boat up north and we would put into port at night. And then when we were in the North Channel of Lake Huron, then we would be dropping our anchor. And then I go at night when I was on my own
Hmm.
boat.
Okay, cool. So you did see other parts of the area around. When you were working for the Detroit Free Press, you were just talking about visiting other places. Obviously you cover the Detroit area, but did they send you either around the region, around the state, or around the nation or beyond to cover any content for the Detroit Free Press?
I covered sports, which meant I traveled basically with the Wings and the Tigers, University of Michigan, Michigan State, and I did boxing. So I did travel quite a bit.
That's great. That's great. Did it take you international or just mostly around the country?
We had a 7-foot creature called the yak, and it was designed for children to teach them all about the world. And I got to go to Australia for three
Oh,
weeks.
awesome.
And then I got to travel to Wimbledon. Yeah, Wimbledon and Poland for another story. And then Canada quite a bit for hockey and baseball. But that's like traveling in the United
Yeah.
States. In fact, where I live right now, I'm looking at Windsor, Ontario. I overlook the Detroit River. And I'm in the shadow of the Renaissance Center, the big building in Detroit.
Oh, great, great. So you love Detroit. Did you ever think about like moving or leaving or going to working in another region, or were you always diehard Detroit? I mean, obviously, you've been there for 40 years, but I'm just curious.
When I first came, I thought I was going to go to a bigger and better paper, but it just worked out where I'm here, and it's been a wonderful career. The last 10 years working, I was a picture editor for the
Yeah,
paper.
no, absolutely. I heard about that. That's great that, even though you weren't able to do the photography, you were still able to
Yeah,
do the photo editing. Talk to me a little bit about that
right.
switch in your career from obviously, taking the pictures to editing. How did you change and how that sort of career change, affect you? Was that sort of a natural progression or did everything kind of fall in line, so to speak? I mean, was it a natural sort of progression?
In 2000, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and it affects my legs. Luckily, it did not affect my brain, so it's a form of dementia that you get with this, but I don't have that. So, in about 2008, 2009, I started staying inside full time. And it was a welcome relief in the middle of winter that I did not have to go out and shoot weather pictures when it was 2 feet of snow. But it was just a natural progression. Um, at the when we had fewer picture or not even, I am good at teaching reporters how to take pictures, and that's a lot of the job. And then working with PR people, it's the exact same thing that I did when I was shooting, except I wasn't going out and shooting. I was just instructing the photographers in how to do things, or how they, not instructing, but creating assignments to see, to make sure that they had their tools to do their
Yeah,
job.
that's great to move from the doer to the instructor and whatnot, being able to pass on your,
Yeah,
your knowledge and your experience that way. That's great. Um,
yeah.
all right, cool. Well, I think we can move on to our next topic tonight. We're talking about freelancers. So, you mentioned earlier, Mary, that you hire freelancers. And before we go into your thoughts on this, I just want to give folks listening and watching
Yeah.
some general understanding of what we're talking about. So, essentially, in California, they passed a bill meant to help freelancers, people who work, as independent contractors for things like Uber and Lyft and all these new, every day there's some new internet service that's trying to capitalize on people's, spare time and whatnot, and the kind of gig economy and whatnot. So in California, they released this, or they approved this bill that essentially means after 35 individual jobs with one company, if the company wants to hire you again for a 36th job, they have to bring you on as an employee. So that means, as an employee, you would get all the same benefits as an employee, as opposed to, again, where these gig workers have no benefits, no protections or whatnot. But this is having a detrimental effect for photographers and freelance photographers specifically, other freelancers as well, journalists and whatnot. But we're talking about, photographers specifically, where, again, after 35 jobs, now it's they're in a situation where they have to be employed or they can't work for a company, and so the company's saying, well, I'm just going to go get somebody else. I'm not going to give you more work because I don't want to bring you on as an employee. I'm going to find another freelancer. Or, again, there are other ways around this. Apparently, like the freelancer can incorporate themselves and work as a contractor for that company or something like that. But again, it is having a detrimental effect on freelancers' ability to make a living doing what they do, which is, again, freelancing. And so I think it's an unintended consequence of a bill, according to, again, some of the websites here, Fight for Freelancers in New York. And the reason I put this website and this link here is because this bill is making its way to New York City, which is another state that is very heavily dependent on freelancers working in many different industries. And so we're seeing this sort of bill making its way through the New York Senate and whatnot, very similar styled, similar in language. And so they're trying to raise awareness about this and obviously prevent it from going through, because it, again, is the detrimental effects it's having on these freelancers' lives. So Mary, obviously you've been a staff employee for your entire career, which is great. But you said you've had to, hire freelancers in, your work. So why don't you tell me a little bit about, obviously that hiring process, how you found freelancers, and, would something like this impact your ability to, work with freelancers if it, if you were still there and if it came to Detroit, if it came to Michigan?
I don't see Gannett hiring anybody on the 36th job at all.
Okay.
That we would definitely have 35 jobs and be done. It's just the way of what corporate America is, and Gannett was just bought out by another company, and they're even more cost cutting.
Yeah.
So it's freelancers don't make a lot of money with us, but they can say as featured in the Free Press.
Sure.
When they go to do for PR firms and for the auto companies, that's where the money is when they make money here in Detroit.
When you had freelancers working for you, were there kind of like your go-to freelancers, like, oh, I'm going to pick that person, like, oh man, yeah, mm-hmm. So there are people you'd probably use many times throughout the year, probably more than 35, right?
Oh, correct.
Yeah.
Yes. And all I say, this is Mary, can you go do this job in 20 minutes sometimes?
Oh my gosh, wow.
But yeah, well, depending on if it was spot news or something all of a sudden came up and we didn't have any staffers, it's like, okay, can you go and do this?
Right.
But yes, no, we had a stable of freelancers.
And so under this bill, you would have essentially had to say, okay, thanks for your 35 jobs this year. See you next year, so to speak, right? Doesn't matter how good they are.
Correct.
How often did, and I know obviously, you were doing your work as the sort of, the recession, or not the recession, but again, the crunch and the downward turn in sort of print media. But, did these freelancers ever migrate or graduate from freelancing to full-time? Was that something they wanted to do, or was that something that you ever had the opportunity to bring someone on?
In 2002, we brought a freelancer on, mm-hmm. but usually they were from another newspaper already.
Okay.
Working in the business. So, and the freelancers, I don't think that they wanted to be full-time staffers. Right. They weren't asking for jobs. They were doing better financially because working for the auto companies, they did very well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess as a freelancer too, they own their work, right? I mean, Detroit Free Press was it a co ownership agreement, or was it something they could use it for that publication and they had to relicense it every time?
We it we had exclusive, I think, for 3 days.
Okay.
We hired them to do, and we had exclusive, and then after that they owned the
Right.
negatives. The Detroit News, they could not sell it to the news. That was the only caveat, because we hired them to do it for
Sure.
us.
Yeah.
So they couldn't turn it around and give it to the competitor.
Right.
But then they were fine to sell it wherever they wanted.
So they could put it on, sort of a distribution platform like Reuters or AP or something like that if they work for a wire. Or would that get automatically
But
uploaded to the wire because they work for the Detroit?
no. We cannot upload pictures to AP at all. When they would want the picture, we would call the freelancer and say, hey, AP wants this. Do you want to sell it to them?
Mm-hmm.
And the pay was not very good in selling it to them. So they declined some of the time. But no, we never resold or gave their pictures out at all.
Yeah.
It was up to them.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's as it should be, right? Because they're freelancers, so they're on their own. And I'm curious, from a newspaper's perspective, having freelancers, did you at all, and obviously you can't dictate what kind of equipment they use, but was there any sort of say, or did you care what kind of equipment they used? As long as it was professional DSLR?
They could have used a disposable camera for all I care about.
Yeah.
As long as they do the job. I didn't care.
Yeah. And could get you the imagery quickly.
And they make deadline.
Mm-hmm.
If they could draw the image, I didn't care.
Yeah. That would be nice. Bring back the old-fashioned sketching,
Yeah.
We need more of that.
I'm going to sound sexist here, but men, when I would come with my cameras, they drool over my cameras. Women just use it as a tool.
Right.
It's the difference between the two sexes.
Yeah.
Of men are, it's gadgets and equipment and whereas for me, it's a tool, a means to the end, and they're glorified paperweights, and I just use it. And it's sexist, but that's the way life works.
Yeah, absolutely. What did you use at the Detroit Free Press when you were photographing?
I used Canon's, the EOS system.
Cool. Yeah, I love Canon.
And yeah, it just that's what our paper was. When we switched before digital, we each had our own individual cameras where we owned them. But with digital and the price, the first bodies we bought were $30,000 each.
Wow.
And we couldn't afford it, so the paper then bought all the digital equipment, and we're a Canon paper.
Great. And were you Canon up until the time when you kind of left, or not? I guess when you moved from full-time photography to photo editing, what was the last kind of Canon camera you used, or what do you use now?
Oh, it can't. Yeah. Oh, I still used EOS all throughout editing because I was still shooting.
I know you have a series of photographs from your apartment, right? Or your
yeah.
So that's great. But what's the latest camera you're using right now? Which EOS system are you using?
Well, I use my iPhone.
Right.
I carry it all the time, but still, I still use the EOS system.
Which is the 1DX or the 5D series? 1D series or 5D series? See, I'm drooling over your equipment as a man. So,
right. I think the D series.
D series. Okay. Yeah, that's a good series of cameras. I was the 5D Mark II was the last camera Canon body I had, and I had all the fancy lenses with the IS and the USM and the f2.8 and the Trinity and all that stuff. So that was my sort of gear. Now I'm all using Panasonic. So I'm fully in the mirrorless camp right now, and the Micro Four Thirds at that. So I've switched over from the big heavy kits to the now lightweight and stuff like that. So if you're ever looking to go mirrorless, that's the best reason to do it. Actually, you could stay Canon EOS and go to the new R system. Are you familiar with the EOS R system, the mirrorless system?
No, not.
Basically, it's just Canon's version of the mirrorless. Mirrorless has been the new kind of buzzword and kind of industry trend nowadays with everything going on. And Canon, of course, and Nikon also both responded to that with their new systems. But so Detroit Free Press was Canon all the way through, and it still is today?
Yeah. Yes, for still.
Yeah.
And then Sony for the
Oh,
video.
okay. So they're using the Sony A7 series, I presume?
I'm not sure.
Okay. It's some sort of paperweight that
In
gets
what I was
video.
doing, I was heavy print centric.
Right.
So, and again, it they're tools, and as long as we have the production, it works.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point about video, and obviously, video became something that most, I'd say, newspapers or enterprises that had presences online pretty much had to start adopting about a decade ago. If you were still doing the shooting, full time, do you think that the paper would have been pushing you to do video as well as photo, or do you think you could have stayed photo?
No. I would have to 100% do video.
Right.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts
Yeah.
about it. In order to survive today, each and every photographer has to know video.
Right.
They cannot do just print.
So when
Just do still.
So when you're sending a freelancer, or when you were sending freelancers out to shoot something, were they instructed to shoot both photos and video, or did you send a video and a photo freelancer?
The freelancers were just print.
Okay,
We wouldn't send them on a video assignment.
right. Okay, so all your video workers were full-time staff members.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
And reporters, where they would get a video clip on their iPhone.
Oh, right, of course. Yeah, well, I mean, iPhones are ever present, like you said, and they actually shoot really good video nowadays. The new iPhone 11 is just spectacular for video. I've actually been migrating a lot of my video production personally, like, family stuff and whatnot, to cell phones just because they're always on you and convenient. But I still like to, shoot video on my, standard cameras and whatnot. Are there any full-time staff photographers in the Detroit Free Press? Or are they all freelancers?
Yes.
Okay.
No. We have staffers. I want to say there's 9.
Okay, great.
And Brian Kaufman is a full-time video photographer. He rarely does stills.
Okay.
And he has won a national Emmy, and every year he wins like 3 or 4 local Emmys.
Yeah.
And he's won National Press Photographer their contest a few times.
Wow. That's great.
So that's what he does.
Since you've had the, obviously awesome opportunity to work at one, institution for so long, you've obviously seen it migrate and change over time. And I'm sure you've answered this question, but have you seen the industry change over time, and where do you see the industry going? Because obviously so many papers, so many publications have either, fired all their staffers, or switched staffers to freelancers, or, all these sort of apocalyptic things. I'm sure you're familiar with all the, institutions that have, went down over the, since the turn of the century. So again, have you seen that? How's the Detroit Free Press sort of rid that wave over time, and where do you see it going in the future?
There will always be a need for good photographs, no matter what. We will always have some kind of staff photographers, because when you look at when you look online, the good photographs still pop out. The galleries with good photographs, people are going to look at. Amateur photos are fine, but you're going to page through them. You want to see good visual context.
Absolutely.
So from the time of the Civil War, we were in business then, and then we started publishing photographs. People always gravitate towards that. So it's the photographer where you just adapt. It's the form, it's the equipment, you just get used to it, and you just produce the best possible photograph, and then it'll all work out somehow. You have to have the content.
So as far as your perspective, then the Detroit Free Press is still committed to having staffers, staff photographers, people on staff for the foreseeable future.
Correct.
That's good.
Because freelancers don't have an invested interest in doing day-to-day and putting out what the staffers do. And right now, the company is still committed to photographers.
That's great. That's great. It's a nice change of pace from what we see normally in the news. Have you, or maybe you've been in touch with your colleagues in other publications that have went full freelance? Have you seen that sort of dip in quality because of the change to full freelance?
I haven't seen other publications, but I can just imagine that it's not the same quality between staffers and freelancers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree. And I think, any publication worth their salt should be able to maintain some staff folks. I know at the last place I was at, one of the publications there, took away all their staff jobs, and then they had to rehire or hire not a staff photographer or photojournalist, but a multimedia journalist. I guess, their intent was to migrate everybody over to this, new way. And one way you can do that is to eliminate all your photojournalist positions and then rebrand them as multimedia journalists. Because again, like you said, that's the way it has to be. You have to have some sort of experience and ability to do and shoot video and create video content, compelling video content. Because that's one thing. Like I see, okay, for instance, I see a publication and they'll do the bare minimum of what is considered video, which is what I saw was like a B-roll stringer, which is essentially just some video strung together and put out there with no narration, no real context, just one clip after another. That's not compelling video content. That is just content for the sake of content.
Yeah, and people know, and they will click right off. And they'll some of our videos have the highest click stuff, and that's what advertisers want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I've seen from the transitionary photojournalist going to videographer. Like, okay, I will set up my camera on a tripod and shoot 5-10 seconds worth of content and then string it all together, and there you go. There's your video piece. Like, no, you need to have a personality on screen. You need to have narration. You need to have, create compelling content. So, I think the new crop of people understand that. They're the folks who have been doing this, since the last 10 years, or people who are coming into college and, producing that now, understand that. And that's what visual journalism is all about.
In the Emmys for the state of Michigan, we submitted 7 entries, and we won 6 of the entries. And because we have our writers and our journalists, and we win, and they don't like to see the free press entered because it's like, damn. But we know how to migrate and how to use. It's a platform, and it's a different medium to tell stories, but we have great storytellers.
That's right. And speaking of platforms, a tripod is a platform that you can set your camera on. And one of the tripods, most tripods need a head of some kind. And so this new Plataball head wants to be your tripod head. And so I saw this online, and it's got a Kickstarter going right now, so you can invest in this if you're so desire. I'd say the company is reputable. They've produced other Kickstarter things in the past, so they're not like some fly-by-night Kickstarter. So if you're interested in investing in them, you probably will get your product. But again, this is a Plataball. What it is a new look at the tripod ball head, and it's pretty neat. It has buttons instead of knobs, so you're not trying to like fiddle. Like I don't know where it is, but I have a tripod head, a ball head on my sling, my little like mini tripod, and it is fine. But again, I have to undo knobs and redo knobs just to kind of move it around. But this, you just press a button, move it around, and then it's neat here. It has a digital level, so if you're not sure If your camera is level, although most cameras nowadays have a level built into them, like my GH5 does, but for older cameras or cameras that don't have that capability, this is a pretty nice feature because you can know, you don't have to look like a little ball and see if it's lined up in the circle, which is usually blocked by the camera. You can just look at this digital level and it'll tell you if it's straight up and down or whatnot. Or if the horizon is straight. So that's nice. That's a nice feature to have because I can't tell you how many times I come back and trying to edit my photos and they're like, oh, it's crooked a little bit, usually from my hand holding. But again, it'd still be not nice if you have it on a tripod. But I think this is a neat little device. Mary, do you think what do you think of this device? Is this something you would integrate into your workflow, or have you ever used tripods? At the Detroit Free Press, was that something you used?
For somebody like me who has now fine motor skills aren't so great, for me that would work beautifully of moving the head around.
I didn't even think about that. That's a great
would
thought.
Work. But anything to make our jobs easier works nicely.
Did you use tripods much during your career, or were they kind of just relegated to the back room?
You always for the fireworks.
Okay.
100%, and that, but usually not because they're confined. If I were shooting like on the second deck, I was shooting baseball someplace high, then moving it around, but very rarely because I just wanted to be mobile and to get going. I use monopods all the time.
Yep. That's a great way to shoot sports or shoot something where you gotta be on the move and get solid frames.
Yeah.
Especially when you're zoomed all the way out. Probably you were shooting sports. I mean, what was the longest frame length or focal length lens you were using? 400 millimeter or higher?
Yeah, that was normal. It was a 400. Sometimes I would put a doubler on it, but very rarely. But usually a 400 2.8.
Yeah, and when I was shooting sports, obviously the fight was between the focal length and the amount of light you have. So hopefully the stadium or wherever you're shooting is well lit, and they're lit for people who want to see it, and photographers and cameras and whatnot. But if not, you're kind of struggling because you can get a 600 millimeter or whatever, 1200 millimeter, but unless you have enough shutter speed, you're going to get some wobbly, blurry stuff out of that. How'd you kind of manage that, or was that something where the stadium sort of took that into account?
Well, the stadiums were all well lit because they were professional, and if not, like covering high school basketball, they didn't move as fast as the pro players. Yeah. So you didn't need the 500th. You could go a little slower and make it work.
Yeah.
But the pro sports were all lit nicely.
Obviously, you're most well known for the photograph of the baseball player who's celebrating their win. What was your favorite sport to shoot? Was it baseball, or did you have another sport that was your favorite?
I liked hockey.
Oh, okay. Hockey's great.
It's fast, and it's just a cool little sport to cover.
Yeah, I've only ever shot hockey once, and I know you got that little window down by the goal area. How did you choose your sort of location where you were going to shoot like the hockey players?
We were able to sit between the benches one period, and then also shoot from the penalty box.
Okay.
So everybody rotated, and Mark Hicks would say, okay, this is where you're going to be for this period, and this is where you're going to be. And then we also shot from the concourse. The Free Press had season ticket seats, and they were mid-ice, 7 rows up. So for one period, I always sat in the seat and shot the players. It was just above the glass. So especially in the playoffs, I would get that seat, and it always worked out nicely.
That's great. What are some other takeaways that you got from your sort of 40 years experience doing the job that like sort of, if I were coming up into the industry now, or, people who are coming into the industry, as, young 18, 19, 20-year-olds, maybe going to college for this or doing it, perhaps for their school. What are sort of some of the basics you think you learned over your time doing the job that you think are still relevant today that they should take into account as they move into the career?
Communication is always the best. Talk to the players, get to the game early. Make sure that you get the roster and find out what's going on, and it works. Just ask questions and listen. And I was listening to one of your podcasts, and one of the guys said, I work for a newspaper and it isn't that relevant anymore. And I'm going, aha, I'm sorry, you're so totally wrong, because it's a way to get pictures out there, and it also can lead to other jobs. When I go places, it's how you treat a secretary, because you don't know what kind of kid she's got who's CEO of a company, and she's going to tell him, I met this really nice photographer and you need to do something with her. You never know who you're going to come across in this life. Yeah. And to always talk politely to everybody and know you're there to discover the world. I'm a photographer because my nose is it's going to stretch from my house to Windsor. I'm nosy, and my job is to ask questions, and then I show it to everybody else. And that's what young photographers need to do. They need to be inquisitive, and they need to shut up then and listen. And when they listen, they're going to learn. And from there, they're going to get other leads to do other things.
Yeah.
The best photographers and the best writers are the most humble, because they listen and they put their subjects at ease.
That's great. Good advice. For another thing I want to ask too is, and I'm sure this is relevant to folks who are listening, if you're a freelancer, if you're someone coming up, and trying to get these jobs, get these positions, get their sort of name and sort of work seen by, you as a hiring or someone who has the authority to pick freelancers, what were some things you looked for in a freelancer that you would say is it all just basically, hey, look at your portfolio, or is it based on the personality, or is it based on what kind of factors are you looking for when you're hiring a freelancer?
If you don't make deadline, you're out. Point blank. When I give you a deadline of 7:00, don't start transmitting. You will have done a test beforehand. You will listen to how I tell you how to do the captions. You will pay attention to what my parameters are. If you don't, you're out. It's like one job. And don't think, and if you come in and tell me how great you are and then don't produce. And when I say I want a photo gallery of 20 pictures, don't give me just 5 and give me different angles.
Yeah.
I'll be polite, but I'm like, he can't do the job, or she. Pay attention to what I have to say. And if you don't make deadline, we're holding a space for you. And if you don't make it, we're screwed.
Right. Now, this is, of course, after you've chosen the freelancer and you've said, okay, I'm going to trust this guy or gal to take photos for me. But like, how are you sort of finding new talent? Were you in charge of finding new talent, or was talent sort of foisted upon you?
I wasn't in charge. Yeah, the talent said, here, use this freelancer.
Okay.
Kathy Kalashevsky, the director of video and photography, said she's the one. People would refer photographers to her, and then we would use them. Well, we did have another freelancer, Salwan Georges, who came to us. He's now at the Washington Post. He came as a freelancer. But he was really good.
Yeah. Were there ever times where she would recommend somebody, and then you'd use them, and then you go back to her and be like, "Where did you get these people? Where are you finding these folks, huh?"
Well, I would just say, hmm, we can't, or they blew deadline, or we had problems. But usually it was working with the photographer, making sure that they understood what our deadlines were and captions. My pet peeve, even with our staff photographers, is
Yeah.
captions of getting the names correct and getting
Oh,
names.
100%. I mean, even where I would work, and it's pretty common in the military is you have to be constantly on people with their captions, in terms of making sure not only that they're capturing the information that's correct, but it's also spelled correctly and it's also has the
Yeah,
factual, whatnot. I can't imagine. I can't tell you how many times I've seen. In my career, and I'm not thinking about any specific place, me doing the job and also, looking at other people's work where it's just like, wow, wow, yeah. It's because photographers we're photographers first and writers second, and when you're building your caption in Bridge, you don't think maybe I should copy that into Word and double check the spelling, and maybe I should double check their name of their the spelling of their names, and maybe I should have like a little bit more information than just person did thing at place. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to have like a little bit of background information in terms of what I'm seeing in this photo.
yeah,
Simple stuff, fundamentals, right?
yeah. Captions are so important.
100%.
It's one thing to look at the picture, but by telling the story, it's much more important.
And one thing I tried to do when possible was get like a quote and throw a quote into the caption. Was that something you like to see in your
Yes.
captions?
Oh, by all means. Yes. It's information. We are in the information
Yeah.
business.
All right. Well, we're reaching the end of our show, and you have had an awesome career. You retired. What is up for your? What were you gonna do now in your retirement? Are you gonna travel the world? Are you gonna just kind of, are you staying connected to the Detroit Free Press? Like call them up every once in a while, be like, what are you doing publishing that photograph? Come on, talk to your the person who took over for you. What's Mary doing nowadays in her retirement?
Well, my multiple sclerosis, I'm in a power
Yeah.
chair, and it just, and currently I can't, I think carrying all the cameras all those years, I have curvature of the spine really
Oh
bad.
my gosh.
And so I'm going to have an operation. It is what it is. And I'm going to have an operation February 5th to straighten my spine.
Wow.
So it's my health, which is, it is what it
Yeah.
is. And since I'm not driving and living in the city of Detroit, right outside of downtown, I'm able to get around on the power
Yeah.
chair. And we have a street called the Q line, and that goes all up and down Woodward for 2 miles. And everything that I need is right
That's
here.
great.
And I'm able to get around beautifully and just terrorize. And people see me going down the street and he says, you go kind of fast in that chair. I'm like, yep, get out of my way.
Mm-hmm.
So
Nice.
no, life is good. And all my friends are here and all the doctors, and I don't want to go anyplace else.
Okay. No desires to go to like warmer climates like Florida or any place like that.
No, I couldn't exist. With my multiple sclerosis, the heat,
Okay.
I melt, and like I can't move. I have to be in a cool room.
Oh wow.
I would have to be in air conditioning all the
Yeah.
time. So, and with the 40-degree weather here, with no snow, I'm able to get around on the power chair on all the
That's
streets.
great.
So, since I'm going to be, I probably 3 weeks in the hospital in February, it can only snow from February 5th to February 28th, no longer than that.
Mm-hmm.
And then life is good.
Yeah.
So, Mother Nature has been listening to me so far this
Hey,
winter.
there we go. All right. Well, hooray, global warming.
Oh, no,
I know, right?
not quite.
Well,
Yeah.
Mary, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. Really appreciate it. Where can people see more about you or your work?
If they Google my name, Detroit Free Press and Mary Schroeder, there's a gallery of my work, and then the Emmy that's there, or the video that's there, is from the '84 World Series, and that won a Michigan Emmy. And then there's a video called "In the Blink of an Eye," and that the University of California, Pomona did that, And then I shot pictures for 2.5 years out of my window. And that's on Twitter at FOTOMARY Detroit. And you can see my view out of my window.
Yeah, no, I've seen that, and I'm very. It's very interesting what you can capture. Obviously, being in one location, because I think, again, you think like, oh, it's just outside of a window, but there's a lot going on, and the changing of the seasons. It's interesting to see what you capture.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely recommend everybody to check that out and watch the documentary. That is an excellent documentary, and it's what what I was found out it's what helped me find out more about you, and it's just very intriguing, kind of hearing about your career that way. Yeah.
Yeah. All it is I have a curiosity, and all I do is ask questions and say, well, why do you do this? And people tell me.
Yeah, that's it.
That's all. I'm nosy.
That's good. That's good to be nosy in this industry, right? You got to. I mean, that's how I'm sure you've gotten so many different leads off of being nosy, right? Finding one thing out from another thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And still to this day, I just can't shut it off. After I started at 9 and I'm 62. I can't just shut it off. And then I'm still going to, if I get a lead, still tell the paper, you got to go do this story.
That's right.
It doesn't turn off. And none of the journalists who are retired from the paper, none of us turned it off.
No, I mean, it's kind of built in. It's ingrained in who you are as a person. So I don't
exactly
think once you start turning that off, it's like you stop being the person you are. So yeah, keep it on, and keep on imparting that wisdom, and hopefully we can have you on and talk about different things and whatnot, and get your insights, because again, I think from a lifetime and career, and thank you for your devotion and service with regard to supporting journalism and photojournalism, and I think that's awesome, and look forward to having you on again and talk about different topics and whatnot, what's going on. So
by all means.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mary. Thank you for taking time out and being on. I really appreciate it. And again, I'm Dave Murphy. This has been Around the Lens, episode 209, and we are out of here.
Thanks for listening to Around the Lens. We hope you enjoyed the show. To continue the conversation, head on over to one of our social media outlets such as Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter. To support the show financially, consider donating to us via Patreon. For show notes from this week's episode and links to everything else we talked about, just go to our website, aroundthelens.com. Finally, if you or someone you know might be a good guest for the show, get in touch with us via email at info@aroundthelens.com.